online, and I know a number of people with different time zones really wanted to join, but are anxious to get the recording afterwards. And as a reminder, this is a continued stream of programming we're doing as a community, both virtual and physical, so stay tuned for more information. And I also want to highlight a couple of things. We have a webcast coming up on August 1st with Wendy Keene. We're doing this summer camp around business architecture, so to speak. So Wendy and I are on this same time on August 1st talking about orientation to a summer camp on business architecture for enterprise architects. So we'll set some context in around the free virtual course, as well as talk about the closing campfire we're going to have with Wendy on September 12th. So definitely that's of high interest. And I also want to highlight as well, we have an enterprise architecture SAP community gathering on August the 8th, again, at the same time. We have a lot of exciting stuff we're going to talk about for the second half of the year. And just a teaser, we're going to be talking as well about a brand new and soon to be launched book in the next few months around enterprise architecture with SAP. So very excited about that. I've been watching in the works for about a little over a year now, and finally being able to talk about it since the publication date is soon. So that's quite exciting. And just before I introduce Chandra, I want to highlight as well a few face-to-face sessions that are very much related to today's topic. This year, there are combined Signavio and LeanIX events happening in different regions. Gold Coast is happening September 11th and 12th. In Chicago is September 16th to 18th, and Frankfurt is October 7th to 9th. So that is a combination of both what were the business transformation events that Signavio did, as well as LeanIX Connect events. They're now brought together as one event. And I want to highlight as well, even though I did punctuate as well the locations of those sessions, they're also virtual offerings. And the bonus is those are all free to attend. So definitely check them out. We'll have a link dropped in the chat with more details on how you can access those. Again, they're both virtual as well as physical events. So without further ado, I want to welcome Chandra Knabel to the event. Sorry, Chandra.
Okay.
On that, ironically, I've known Chandra for many, many years, and I'm still not good at last names. But very pleased that Chandra can join us. Chandra is now with SAP in the Architecture Advisory Group. Chandra was also a former architect as an SAP customer. Chandra and I had the pleasure of meeting back when she attended our Enterprise Architect Forum back in 2020. And really appreciate that all Chandra has done and her passion for the community, as well as her passion, deep passion for women in architecture as well. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Chandra. And just a quick reminder for folks, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat throughout today's session. Chandra, over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share this story. As you mentioned, I'm an enterprise architect at SAP. I've been here for about 2 years, and I came from a customer where I led their enterprise architecture practice. But I have a connection to business architecture actually through Wendy Kuhn that started back in 2019. I was taking a class on business architecture at Penn State, and she was a guest lecturer. And I really connected with her message around business architecture and how it really enables strategy execution. And I was at the time running a big program that kind of needed some help in that area. And it really was influential to me to be able to hear what she was talking about. So after 2019, kind of followed her content, and then I read her book, Strategy to Reality, which a lot of the content in this presentation is based on. And then she gave an expert class at the SAP North American headquarters in March that I attended in person. And while I was sitting in that class, I started to see a connection from what she would refer to as a business architecture knowledge base to two tools that SAP owns, which is LeanIX and Signavio. And that was really where this presentation came from. And I'm happy to share with you this information. So as far as an agenda goes, we're going to talk about, I want to start with a bit of a connection to our SAP Enterprise Architecture Framework, and just talk about where does business architecture fit into the overall enterprise architecture viewpoint. Then I want to give an overview of Business Architecture 101, and that's heavily based on the content from Wendy's book and the presentations that she's given. And I'm going to talk about LeanIX and Signavio and how they can enable your business architecture practice. And I'm going to do a demo walkthrough of the two tools with very much of a kind of a highlight or a focus on enabling business architecture. I'm not going to give a demo of those tools end to end. There's lots of other resources that you can get that information from, but this is really putting a spotlight on how does it enable specifically business architecture. And then if we have time, we can do a Q&A at the end, or you can put your questions in the chat. Okay, so let's start with that connection to the SAP Enterprise Architecture Framework. I don't know if any of you, or maybe some of you, are familiar with this. I actually wasn't that aware of the framework itself. I recently did some training on it and found out really what's there, and I was really impressed. I myself did TOGAF back in 2012 when I was starting up my first enterprise architecture practice. And, you know, TOGAF is pretty broad, right? And there's a lot to it. And a lot of times I hear people talking about how do you implement TOGAF because it's so comprehensive. And so what SAP has done is really taken TOGAF and some other standards like APQC and kind of trimmed it down based on our best practices of working with customers and what we found is adds value. And kind of, I want to say, cut the fat maybe a little bit and kind of left what was really valuable. So that's kind of the methodology aspect of it. Then we have this tremendous library of reference content. And, you know, I came from a customer, so I remember trying to build out my own business capability model. I was using APQC at the time, which was generic. It wasn't specific to any industry, and I didn't have any connection to applications. I didn't have any connection to process. Well, the SAP reference content has content for all of our industries, and specifically within LeanIX now, within LeanIX now, there is reference content available for 15 of our industries that we support, and more to come there. So that's the connection to the tooling. But anyway, our reference content is very robust. It's business capabilities, connections to solutions, and also business processes as well. And then, as I mentioned, there as part of this framework, there's reference to how to use the tools. We have this, what we call Business Transformation Suite, and LeanIX and Signavio are part of that tooling. And then we do have advice or, you know, guidance on how to set up a practice, how to take your enterprise architecture at maturity and increase it over time. And then, of course, we offer services to support if desired. So that's just, you know, really kind of an overview of the SAP Enterprise Architecture Framework. And then this is, if you are familiar with TOGAF, this is the architecture development methodology that goes around the circle. We've used that same circle and leveraged it. And then I just wanted to highlight, and the topic that we're going to be talking about today is business architecture. But I just kind of wanted to show that, you know, sometimes there's this debate, is business architecture a different practice than enterprise architecture? And, you know, from our perspective, the answer is no. Business architecture is part of the enterprise architecture, and it all connects together. And then I did want to highlight that this is just a high-level view of the SAP Enterprise Architecture methodology. I just wanted to highlight that business process and solution process are part of our methodology. Some views of business architecture do not include process. It's more of an adjacent methodology. And if you look at the Business Architecture Guild's Business Architecture BizBoc document, it does not include process, but process is more kind of a related or adjacent perspective. But as far as the SAP model goes, it is included, and it is included in our reference content. And then I just have this, I guess I'm a little bit nostalgic. This is, when I first learned about enterprise architecture, which started really in 2012, there was a book that was written by Scott Bernard, An Introduction to Enterprise Architecture, and this was one of the first books that I read on the topic. And he has this cube, and I always love this cube. I don't know if it's because it looks like a Rubik's Cube to me, or I just like the way the layers. And so this is how I view enterprise architecture. And so kind of at the top level, we have the business architecture components that we're going to talk about. And then you can kind of go down the stack and think about, products and services, maybe journeys and things like that. And then start to think about data and information, applications, and then kind of the most technical pieces of it, the networks and infrastructure. So this view was put out in 2012, and I think it pretty much still stands. I also included the roles, the different types of architecture roles, because a lot of times I get questions about, what is the difference between a solution architect and an enterprise architect? And this is informed by the EA roles of the it's from the Federation of Enterprise Architecture Professional Organizations. And they had a document that outlines all these. And I just kind of wanted to show that, where you have a solution architect would be narrow and deep in a specific area. Whereas you can see a business architect, you could have somebody that focused, primarily on those top areas, those top levels. Or you can have, what would be considered to be a classical enterprise architect that would see overall the whole view of the whole thing. So I just kind of wanted to give that view and kind of go back in time a little bit, tie back to that history and show, yes, business architecture has been viewed as part of enterprise architecture for a long time. So I wanted to just start with Business Architecture 101. And again, this content is informed very heavily by Wendy's book and, her thought leadership. So this statistic is shocking. 90% of organizations fail to execute their strategies successfully. Now, I don't know in my personal experience whether I've seen 90% failure rate, but I can tell you that every organization that I've ever worked at has, come up with great strategies. I always felt like the strategies were very well thought out. Maybe they were, individual teams that knew the industry and, very knowledgeable. They work with consulting partners to come up these, really great strategies. But as execution happens, it seems like they get watered down, and sometimes they just get canceled because, they didn't get the results that they were hoping to achieve. And that is really why business architecture exists as a practice, is really to bridge that gap, right? To take strategy and take a bridge from strategy to execution and get the results that you're looking to achieve. And really by following these practices and, the approach, I believe that you can really increase the effectiveness of that strategy execution. So again, I mentioned this a couple times. This is a book that Wendy had written about this topic, and I know she has a new book out as well. It's a great book, highly recommended. So her view, and this is her definition, is business architecture is a holistic view of an organization and its business ecosystem. So just to break that down a little bit, holistic is an important word in that. So it's the overall view of an organization. It's not just about the strategy. It's not just about the IT technology. It's about all of it and how it works together. And typically, most people in an organization, unless it's the CEO or somebody at a very high level, they tend to see their silos and understand everything from their viewpoint, but it's very difficult to see the overall. And that's really what business architecture is about. And then the other thing I want to focus on in this definition is the business ecosystem. So it's not just about the business, the four walls of your business, but it's about the ecosystem in which you operate. And so because of these two elements and what business architecture is really hoping to achieve, it has to be high level because you have to see the forest for the trees, right? You have to see the overall perspective for this to make sense. If you go too deep, too detailed, you're going to lose the viewpoint that you need for this to work correctly. So this is, a definition and further decomposing that. So business architecture is a business blueprint. And if you think about what might happen if you're having an acquisition or a merger, a new business model, or maybe introducing a new sales channel. These are all things that you need to really look at from a very, very high level perspective, right? It's important that you can see all of the components and how they fit together. And I like this part of it. It's the scaffolding that connects everything in the business and the technology together. I know I spent my career, more than 30 years working in corporate IT. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the time I didn't fully understand, why I was doing projects or, what was the point. I did them because, that was what, I was executing, but I didn't understand necessarily how it connected to the business strategy. And then as far as key components, value streams, how value is created for a customer, and the capabilities, how the work, what is being done within the organization to create that value. Those are the two key components of business architecture, and I'll go into that in more detail in a minute. Now, I mentioned this before, and it's a little bit of semantics, but I just kind of wanted to have you be able to understand this, is depending on how you look at it, business process either is part of business architecture or a close friend. And so, these are other key disciplines. So, business process is one that we think about a lot at SAP because we have tons of reference content and we look at a lot of things from a business process perspective. But again, depending on how you look at it, it is or is not exactly part of business architecture itself. And then, of course, given that I work for a software company, we think a lot about applications. But again, those are kind of tied to business architecture and, that IT architecture and that business architecture. If you think about my cube, they're all connected together. And of course, requirements and then journeys as well. So this is what is considered the business architecture process. And it's very simple when you look at it, almost deceivingly simple. It makes sense. Okay, you start out with a strategy. And that's where most companies, at least in my experience, have come up with, very good, solid strategies. And then this is where things start to go a little bit awry. So they start with a great strategy and they immediately pop into either planning initiatives or executing solutions. They skip over the step of architecting changes. And then typically they go and they execute solutions. So, okay, planning an initiative is like a project or a program. How are we going to introduce these new things? And then we go and we execute. We implement the software. We make the changes, whatever it is that we're doing. And then a lot of times I've noticed not all companies are great at measuring success. So we said we had a strategy, maybe we had some KPIs, maybe we didn't, that we were trying to achieve, but let's look at the success over time and make sure that we're not only achieving, but maybe exceeding, the results from that strategy. But what happens when you do that and you skip over this step 2 is that you end up having to go backwards. So I have an example. So I mentioned I was running a program when I took the business architecture class when I first ran into this concept. And we had a strategy. We were implementing a new sales channel. It was a well thought out strategy. It was very good. It was important that we did it. So I got handed the initiative. And then I started to come up with a couple of projects and we were running the program and all of that. And that made sense. And then at some point, we started to execute the solutions. And then we realized, wait a minute, we need, a capability that we don't have. And who's going to do this? And what organizations are going to be, impacted by this? And what are the new organizations that are needed? All of that hadn't been thought through. So then I had to go backwards and kind of try to figure it out in a reactionary way, maybe add in some initiatives, maybe update the initiatives that I was doing. And by the way, we didn't really have a defined measure of success. So then I had to kind of go backwards again and figure that out. And there was a lot of back and forth. It was a very successful program, but I could see kind of real time as I was doing it that had I done this in a more organized manner, it could have gone a lot better and a lot smoother. So that's just an example of how following this process can really benefit the end result. So then we talked about having like these related fields, project management. We have business architecture in here, and then this is kind of a view. And again, this is from Wendy's book and how she sees it and her experience. Sometimes it might differ as far as the different other related fields on the left-hand side. But this just gives you an idea of where those other disciplines are going to interact with the business architecture group. It's either a group or, maybe it's just enterprise architects doing business architecture. It's very much of a connecting the dots type of role. So you have business architecture is pretty much involved in the whole entire process. And then, if you think about process, so we talked a lot about process. So that kind of comes in when you're, going to execute or planning your initiatives, and you start to take that process view. And then, maybe a lot of the folks on here are enterprise architects. You start to think about IT architecture. So this is just kind of giving you a layer of, from a business architecture process perspective, when these different roles are going to interact with it. So as I mentioned, there are kind of two main components of business architecture. The first is the value stream. These are the activities that create value for customers. They cut across different departments and they connect business capabilities, and they're used to architect the changes that need to be made to achieve the objectives that we're trying to achieve. So this is an example. I just threw in one from a business, industry that I have worked in. So that would be order to cash, and then you have the value stream end to end. How are you creating value at each of the steps along the way? So this is the value stream, and then you have the value stream segment would be the individual components. And underneath that are the processes and capabilities that support creating that value. And then the other key component for business architecture is capability. So this is what the organization must do to create value. So you have your value streams, and then you have your enabling capabilities. Now, for me, capabilities, it took me a while to understand this. I don't know why, but for some reason it was just confusing to me. But it really is what needs to be done. And a process is how you do it. Capability is what you need to do. Okay. And capabilities can be reused across value streams. And they really are the key to planning business architecture and understanding the organization from a high level perspective and how it all connects together. The other thing that capabilities are really important for is they're very much the linchpin between this business architecture perspective and the IT architecture. Capabilities are kind of where they meet and connect. So we said value streams and capabilities are the foundation. So we have our value streams and we have those enabling capabilities. Now, going back to my example to just try to make this, real. So the example of when I was running this program, I was introducing a new sales channel, and we started to plan these initiatives, and we were thinking about software, and then all of a sudden we realized, oh, we need, like a digital product capability that we never had before. It was a B2B organization, and we didn't have that capability. So, what do we figured out, oh, we need to add that capability. So that's kind of where I went backwards to architect the change. And then, it's people, it is technology, but it's also process and organizational change and, creating that new capability within the organization. So that's an example. And this is really the foundation for understanding a business from a business architecture lens. Now, initiatives are what takes those capabilities. So let's say that we have new capabilities that we need to introduce to support a strategic initiative. Let's say we need to make some changes to existing capabilities. And maybe, you could even get rid of some capabilities if it's something that you don't need. But an initiative takes the work of those capabilities and forms them into projects and programs and figures out basically what needs to be done and in what order. So this is kind of a Gantt chart view, if you will. And it's something that by organizing them, it can be much more effective to get it done. And I have an example from our own organization, SAP, when we were doing a transformation. Using this type of view, they were able to figure out that I think they had 10 major strategic initiatives in a year, and they figured out that 7 of the 10 were impacting the same capability. Now, imagine if you were the department manager running a capability and you had 7 different projects that were going to change and impact that capability and the way you do your work. That could be hugely frustrating, right? So it would make sense to kind of group those in a logical way. So by being able to see it from this capability perspective, we were able to change the way that that work was planned into initiatives. And then the last connection point are those 2 areas that are, related to business architecture, but not necessarily a part of it. But again, that's just really semantics. And as I mentioned, capability is really the linchpin of how this all comes together. So the items to the left are really part of that business architecture, core capabilities that connect the capabilities. So your stakeholders, your objectives, your metrics, all of that connects to business capabilities. And then we have business process. And then, of course, the applications, data, and integration as part of the IT architecture. And again, the capabilities are what bring it all together. So this is the view. This is the knowledge base. So during Wendy's, 6 or 7 hour presentation that she did, she kept talking about needing a knowledge base to make all these connections and to bring it all together. And this is really what it looks like from that perspective, is all the different pieces of information and then connecting them together. So when there's a change that's initiated, like, for example, maybe you're doing an acquisition or a new strategy, or in my example, a new sales channel, we can understand the value streams and what segments will be impacted. So where is this going to change how we create value for a customer? And I know, by the way, what capabilities are impacted? What do we need that we didn't have? We didn't even think about that until later, and then we kind of had to go backwards. And then we can understand the impacts on all the rest of the business architecture. So, what are the impacts to the stakeholders? What organizations are going to be involved? Are there other initiatives that may also be impacted as well? These are all things that are typically realized kind of too late, and then you have to go backwards and be very reactionary instead of being proactive. And then when you connect it all together, then you can connect it and understand the impact, from those capabilities to business process and also to technology. So that's the view of having this business architecture knowledge base and how it can all work together. So now I want to talk about LeanIX and Signavio. So while I sat and listened to Wendy teach about business architecture, and I believe in the value of it, I started to make a connection to 2 tools that we have from our business transformation suite that can serve as that business architecture knowledge base, and that is LeanIX and Signavio. So LeanIX and Signavio work together. On the left-hand side is process, on the right-hand side is enterprise architecture management. They have very deep and very robust capabilities in each area, but I am just taking the lens of business architecture, just so you're aware. I'm not going to go into the details of each one. This is just an overall viewpoint of Signavio. Again, it's really around business process management, and it really has a lot of extensive capabilities that are in there, but I'm just focusing on how does it support the business architecture knowledge base to enable your business architecture practice. So these are some of the key features of Signavio. I called out the different elements that would support that knowledge base. So metrics, and then, we talked a lot about processes and value streams as being really important. There's other elements of the business architecture knowledge base that you can also store in Signavio and link together. Link together is the most important part. Then we have LeanIX, which is our enterprise architecture management tool. And as we talked about, business architecture is part of enterprise architecture. So you can see this is the LeanIX meta model. And while I was looking at this, I made a connection to my beloved enterprise architecture cube. So, and if I start to see, how does this connect? Okay, well, LeanIX's meta model at the top level maps to those goals and initiatives. And then we kind of go down the cube, right? And if you see, it's doing the same thing on their meta model. And we look at data and information, applications, and then networking and infrastructure. So it really does align to that view, that full view of enterprise architecture. And again, you can use it to support your knowledge base. Now, just a word about how these two applications connect together. LeanIX and Signavio have been friends for, I don't know, I think like 10 years. SAP bought Signavio a few years ago. We bought LeanIX last year, but that integration, that out-of-the-box integration, I think has been in place for about 10 years. So processes, value streams, and journeys are in Signavio, and they are, that's a system of record, and it's a one-way integration, and they end up in a business context in LeanIX, view only. And then say business capabilities, organizations, and applications, those are authored in LeanIX, but they can be sent into the Signavio dictionary. And then, for example, if you associate an application with a process, that information is sent back to the application and the business context so that those two are connected together. And that would allow you to understand, if I'm going to change a process, what applications might need to change, for example. So again, and I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, this is the knowledge base. This is the view of how it all fits together. And then this is how LeanIX and Signavio enable that. The yellow represents what's in Signavio, and the blue represents what's available in LeanIX. And I'm going to walk you through that now. I just wanted to mention, most of our customers implement LeanIX and Signavio from a more of an enterprise architecture perspective or a business process perspective. I'm just highlighting the business architecture elements of those. And this is just a view of how customers find value in these two tools working together to, say, do a business transformation. But again, I'm really just focusing on that narrow focus of the business architecture perspective. And this is a customer example. They don't say that they're using it for business architecture, but they talk about using LeanIX and Signavio to be able to get insights into the process and the transparency and the big picture of the whole organization. And I was like, this is business architecture, what they're talking about. So I like that example. Okay, now we're going to do a demo walkthrough. So again, we start with this knowledge base, and we're going to go through, I'm going to show you Signavio first. So we start with the Process Explorer, where you can see best practices and strategic objectives and get to a lot of different content. We're going to start with the strategic objectives. So here you can see that you can define strategic objectives and connect them to business goals, business processes, metrics, and then capabilities and innovations. But just starting at that top level, here's where you can define those strategic objectives, and those can also be linked and sent to LeanIX. And then drilling down from your strategic objective, then you go down to the goals. Okay, how are we going to achieve this? Get more specific. So then you can define those goals in here, and you can include, additional documentation, maybe even videos about why, what are we doing and why are we doing it? I've, talked to customers that use this capability to get their whole organization on board of what they're trying to achieve. And then here's a view of looking at the metrics and benchmarking. So I talked about, I know in my experience, I've seen not always having clearly defined goals for a strategic objective. This allows you to not only set a goal, but then once you go live, really see how you're doing, operationally, customer sentiment, whatever, ongoing, and increase that, increase the realization of that strategy over time. And then, as we talked about, Signavio, at its core is a business process management tool and a very, very powerful tool for that. So just from this one view, and this is all customizable, this is just the view that we're using. So process, you can decompose and go drill down into the processes that your organization has. Now I'm showing the best practices reference content from the SAP Enterprise Architecture Framework, but you can see we start with an end-to-end process view, which are like 8 end-to-end processes that most companies have. Again, this can be customized. This is the reference content I'm showing you. And then we get to that value stream view. So we talked about value streams were a key component of business architecture, and this is the view of those within Signavio. And again, they can be linked to LeanIX just to bring all this connectivity together. This is an example of a business process within Signavio. And I mean, again, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what's in Signavio, because it's all very data driven and the ability to kind of optimize your existing processes and view them. But the key point here is that we can see those processes and then start to make connections that will support that view to do enterprise architecture. So in this case, I wanted to highlight that this process is showing that it's using different applications. And again, that information is sent back to LeanIX. So you can say, for example, understand if you make a change to a process, what applications, would need to be changed or what would be impacted, as an example. And then customer and employee journey models can also be accessed. This is an example of a customer journey from within Signavio. And this is really just taking the same kind of information, but flipping it on its side to look at it from a journey perspective. And you can take, all the information that you already had. So you have your metrics, you have your processes, you have organizations and IT systems, and then you can see those from a lens of a customer journey, for example. And again, this information can be synced to LeanIX so that you can have that viewpoint across both. So what I've shown you is all the components that I said were in Signavio, highlighted in yellow, and now I'm going to hop into LeanIX and show you the rest. So just as a reminder, just bringing this back again, value streams, processes, and journeys are in SAP Signavio. They come into LeanIX as a business context, and they can be connected to all these other fact sheets within LeanIX. And then there is a bidirectional integration. Out of the box, it supports application capability and organizations going into the dictionary in Signavio. And then as any relationships are developed within a process, or the information in Signavio, that information is sent back to LeanIX to enable reporting and visibility. So now we're just going to start. This is the LeanIX inventory view, and I just kind of wanted to highlight that meta model that we talked about here is very similarly reflected in their inventory. So it kind of goes top down, and it goes back to the cube, right? So we say, okay, we're going to start at the highest level. Objectives all the way down to tech categories, very, very much similar to the way that cube is defined. And so you can see all the different information. And this is out of the box. It's very easy to extend and add additional fact sheets, if your organization requires it. So business context, I'm going to start with that because we were looking at process, we were looking at Signavio, and I'm saying how this information can be brought in. It's read-only from the perspective of you're not going to update a process in LeanIX, but you're going to be able to see it and connect it to other things. So this is an example of a process, and it just has the definition and then a description of it. And then you can start to take that process and connect it to other things. And this is where the transparency starts to come in. You can connect it to initiatives. You can connect it to applications, departments. Any of those fact sheets can be associated with the process to give you visibility of where a change might have other impacts. And then, as I mentioned, the process comes in, it's view only, but you can view the BPMN process flow within LeanIX. So this is an example of that. And I know for me, I was an application developer, and I would make changes and do work, but I didn't necessarily understand how it fit into the big picture, just to be honest. And so I know for me, from my perspective, I would have found this really, really helpful to understand, how, what comes before this, what comes after it, and really start to make some connections. Or, if I'm going to make a change, what value streams am I impacting? And I can really start to see the interconnectedness of all of it. So then, then we have initiatives. So we said initiatives are either, say, projects or programs that group together changes. And then we can start to see transparency. If you think about, like I was thinking about a stakeholder that maybe had a strategic initiative, and they're sitting at the top of the organization in, I don't know, one department, but they have no idea how many individual pieces are required to actually make this happen successfully. So by creating those initiatives and then associating the business capabilities, the applications, all these different components that make up that initiative and that require it to be successful, it can really help with that transparency and understanding the scope of the change. And then, as I mentioned, you can tie to strategic initiatives, so you can have the broad initiatives, and then you can decompose them into smaller, initiatives, and then again start to tie it all together, and really help folks to understand how their work contributes to that overall strategic initiative for the company. And then once you break those initiatives into smaller pieces, then you can start to see, and this is really the power of LeanIX, is these relationships. You can connect kind of anything to anything. So if you start to see, and I'm showing you all the connections, but then, it's all data that's stored in the system. And then you can, create delivered reports that show all of these relationships and dependencies, so that when you're starting to plan an initiative, you really, really understand what all is impacted and affected. And then this is just showing that you can add organization. So it could be a department, a business unit, a region, however you want to define your organization. But you can start to attach organization to those initiatives. So you understand, like I used that example earlier that was from SAP, where we had one capability that was being changed by 7 different projects. Well, this could show you how many different projects are impacting a specific department. I know my last organization, sales, we would introduce all these different changes for the sales department. They can only take so much change because they needed to sell. So that's a good perspective to have. And then we talked about, business capabilities really being the linchpin. And that is, you can connect those business capabilities to the objectives and start to understand what's going to be changed, and what's going to be new capabilities are going to be introduced, and you can start to see that transparency and visibility. And then drilling down as an example, here's a good example where we have, this one business capability, and it is has 6 applications that are supporting that. So, I was talking about the objectives. So there's 6 objectives that are being impacted by that business capability. And that's similar to the example that I gave you from SAP's perspective. So is that really a good idea? Maybe we need to kind of reorder that or clump them together or somehow plan this a little bit better, so as to make it more effective, right? This is all about effectiveness and speed. So then this is just a little drill down into those business capabilities because they are so important. You can capture all kinds of information about them. Typically, customers are looking at, maybe capturing the current maturity of the capability. How well are we doing it today? And what do we need it to be to support this strategic initiative? And how important is it to us? That's just an example. You can use all these out-of-the-box attributes, or you can also add your own depending on your needs. And again, we start to see that visibility of capability. Now we're looking at it from a capability perspective. What are all the things that are connected to that capability? And then, I know I'm a enterprise architect, so I think about applications primarily. I think about that a lot. So we look at, okay, this business capability, how many applications are supporting that? Now, you might kind of wonder, why do we need 6 applications that support that capability? That might lead into an application rationalization discussion potentially, but it also gives you an idea of the scope. And again, I think a lot of times the people that are planning these strategies, they have no idea how many changes may be needed to get the actual execution that they're looking for. So this is the application fact sheet. And again, you can tie it to initiatives, data objects, capabilities, what have you. Anything in that data model can be connected to other fact sheets. And this is an example of a data object. So, now obviously we know how important data is. And, this is used, I've seen this used a lot for tracking, sensitive data like PII information or something like that. So we might capture, okay, this application, we're not going to put every single attribute it has, obviously, but you can maybe capture the key elements, things that need to be secured or monitored in a specific way. And then that way you can start to get that visibility. And then, if you're going down, kind of down the cube, and you start to think about integrations, we do a lot of work, with ERP systems that have a lot of integrations. So, this is really drilling down, okay, now what is this application connected to? And you can start to define all the interfaces that are going to be impacted, by a change. So again, understanding the scope and the connectivity. And those initiatives, like I mentioned, they group the projects, the changes, into projects and programs so that you can understand how to best group those together to get the results you're looking for. And I threw this in here. This is a fairly new capability that LeanIX recently added, which is an AI. It's an extension to their meta model that you can just add in, and it allows you to look at AI impacts to business processes, to business capabilities, and also to applications. So just to start to get some visibility to, where do you want to use AI? Where are you using AI? And what applications have that capability maybe that you're not using. So this is just an extension of that that you might want to include. So to finish it out, we went through this knowledge base, the view of the knowledge base, and I've shown you all of the different elements of the business architecture components and where they can be captured and what type of visibility they can give you from within these two tools. So hopefully you agree that this is a great idea to use these tools together to serve as a business architecture knowledge base. I've got some links that I'll share in this deck. The book that we talked about, the class that Wendy conducted that I mentioned to you a couple times, that is available online, self-paced you can do. I believe it leads to a certification also. The Business Architecture Guild's Business Architecture Body of Knowledge is kind of the official document of all of business architecture. Paul mentioned at the beginning, I'm active in the Women in Architecture, trying to get more women into the field. So that's a group that I would encourage you to look into, either as a member or as an ally member. And then we do have the SAP Enterprise Architecture SAP community, that is Paul's community. So just put a plug for that. And then I put in a bunch of links about the SAP Enterprise Architecture framework for your reference. And that's it. Do we have any questions? Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, you've got a few in the chat. We'll start with the easy ones, because okay, there are some that are not. First one, would you say that order to cash is equal to value streams? And I replied back that that's a good question. It's a common misunderstanding. So Chandra, talk about the difference between the process and the value stream.
So the value stream is a higher level view that has the components of how value is created. When you drill into that, that's where you get to capabilities and process of how that value is delivered. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, but Larson, you asked that question.
Steve, why don't you go on camera if you can, please? The man behind the chat.
Absolutely, always a pleasure. Right, next question. If time permits, can we dive into the concepts of capability instances and how they can be managed in the architecture knowledge base? That's another, probably take you a little bit longer to answer than the last one. So fire away.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, capabilities, I'm not sure I fully got the question.
Capability instances. So, yeah. And if, Michael, you want to come off, can we take people off mute, or is that not a...
No, I think just based on the chat for now.
Let's do the chat, okay.
Complicated.
Okay, yes, okay. So I'll restate the question, Chandra.
Okay.
Can we dive into the concepts of capability instances and how they can be managed in the architecture knowledge base?
Okay. I mean, it's a great question. I think that capabilities, or like I mentioned earlier, for me, it was something that was a fairly new concept when I learned about it first. So, we mentioned that capabilities can be reused across processes. So, I don't know, I'm just thinking of something, I don't know, like invoicing. could be an example. So creating invoices. So you create invoices for customers, you create invoices for, I don't know, other stakeholders that you work with. So that capability of invoicing could be reused across different value streams. And it could also be consolidated, and it depends, it could even be handled by different organizations. Within the LeanIX meta model, you can have one capability associated to multiple applications, organizations, process. You can kind of take it and take that one capability and expand it. You could associate it to multiple value streams, what have you. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that's certainly something that there's a lot of information out on. I know I started with APQC on my own knowledge of business capabilities and how they function and represent an organization and what you do.
Okay, next question. This is for 2 points in the quiz. What about the impact and the integration of WalkMe in the approaches that you illustrated? Where does that fit in?
That's a great question. I think we're still figuring that out, but I will tell you, I didn't mention all of the tools that are part of our business transformation suite. There's also a cloud application lifecycle manager and WalkMe. So that's all coming together. And I don't know, I'm trying to think if that would be that would certainly help with organizational change. And it would be maybe an adjacent practice to business architecture, but for sure it's going to be an exciting, innovation that we're adding to that suite. Okay.
Any plans on aligning the terminology between LeanIX and Signavio?
That is a good question. I'm not really sure if I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I imagine it will. There's been a tremendous amount of change that has happened in terms of additional capabilities coming into LeanIX, and the LeanIX and Signavio, they're part of one team. So I imagine that as they continue to evolve together, they'll come a little bit closer together.
Okay, we've got a follow-on point to the piece on the value stream comments. I'll just read it out. This is live reading out, so I've not edited. So hopefully this is all going to work out. Not exactly on the value stream slide, there was an example on order to cash as a value stream. And later in the presentation, order to cash was shown as an end-to-end process. I just wonder how you distinguish between value streams and end-to-end processes, or maybe you don't.
Yeah, I see end-to-end as being potentially being a higher level of a way of organizing the value streams, but I think it just depends on what's appropriate for the organization, right? This is all just a framework and reference content. You always have to customize it for your use. So that's how I see it.
Yeah. Okay, I don't see any further questions in the chat.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve and Chandra. So Chandra, just any closing words. If I could ask you for a few key closing points for our audience, what would you like them to most take away from your talk today? And further add to that, any added tips? I know you have some links, key places to go next.
Yeah, so, I think to start with, I think having a great strategy is a good place to start, but if you don't execute on it effectively, it's really not worth it, right? And so the real value of a strategy is in the execution. So I would start with that. That is why business architecture matters. And I think, I definitely would point you to Wendy's book, the Business Architecture Guild. If you're interested in really going into this at a deep level, I think those are great places to start and to go. And obviously, what I've shown is that we have two tools that you may have in your organization for another reason, or maybe you don't. But I think that what I've tried to highlight is that these tools can serve as a really effective knowledge base to support a business architecture practice that you may not have even realized that you had. And it really, I think the transparency that you get And again, not having to go backwards in a reactive mode and stop, we need to figure this out, and kind of that back and forth, but really taking the time to go in that stepwise process, and really that key step of architecting the changes. These tools can help you do it in an effective way, and again, see how they relate to everything else. And I'm sure if you're in IT like I've been, you understand that there's a lot of impacts to things, but when you start to see them all together, in one place, in one report, in one view, it really helps you to understand, okay, this is a big deal, and we need to really coordinate our efforts. So I think it's a very powerful practice. And that's it.
Steve, anything to add on your end? I thought the chat master would have a few added comments.
Well, before you get to my thoughts, there are, just when I said no further questions, there's 2 or 3 popped in. So let's just go through them real quick. Number one, what's your view on business capabilities versus business function? Acknowledging that the BizBoc has a business function, but not, actually you see business function twice, but not business capability, I think you mean. Could you talk about the difference between business capabilities and business functions?
I'm not sure if I have the best answer, but I'll tell you my perspective. I think business functions are more organizationally organized, whereas business capabilities can be spread out and reused, and it's a different way of looking at the organization that allows to find that reuse and understand transparency and how it all fits together. To me, a business function is more of an organizational, this is the finance department, this is the IT department, this is the accounts payable department, and that's a business function. That's how I see it.
That's fair. Let's do next one, and this is a LeanIX related question.
As last question on this, we're running out of time.
Last question. Okay, so this is the best question anyway, so let's just do this one. As you know, there's a strong relationship between IT component and application fact sheets in LeanIX. What do you think about inheriting some information from IT components to application, or level 1 and level 2 application automatically, for instance, lifecycle information? I know this is one of your pet topics, Chandra, so what do you think?
Yeah, so I'll just pull this up so we have it up in front of us. So the question is around IT components and applications and how they're they're joined at the hip. So just for everybody's, information, application would be, like the name of the application that a user would know to log into. I mean, in our case, SAP S/4HANA, and then the IT component would be elements that make up that application. If it was on premise, you might have servers, you could have databases, you could have operating systems, what have you, right? I have seen examples of automations that are available that cascade down information from, parent-child or related fact sheets. So I think that could make sense. I'd have to look. I mean, it's a tool and you can use it a lot of different ways. I think you have to think about the end in mind. What are you trying to report on? What are you trying to get out of that insight? And then work backwards and give you just enough detail to give you the insight you need, but don't overdo it, because whatever you put in there, you got to maintain. So, because it's worthless if you don't maintain it. So, I would say get in just enough detail. And if you want to, cascade some down, I'll say down or up, there are some automation tools that are available within LeanIX that can do that.
Awesome. So I think we'll just have to wrap things up here, and want to thank you very much, Chandra, for joining us and share your insights. And I know you're always I definitely recommend following Chandra on LinkedIn, and she's always open to questions on this topic. And I think I know the other thing we'll do as a community as well. We mentioned the upcoming LeanIX and Signavio events. We will have a number of architects that will be attending, and as well as some customers in our community, and we'll be sharing some point of views and creating some insights from those events as well. So stay tuned for that. And lastly as well, I put a post in there about the Business Architecture for Enterprise Architects Summer Camp. Wendy and I kicked that off on August 1st. And quite simply, it's an introduction to your opportunity to attend the free Stealth Studies course, or People in Your Organization, architects that are interested about learning about business architecture. So Wendy does an awesome job. We've had great feedback from the course. So if you're interested, join, or you know of someone else who is interested, please pass it on. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and watch for my post soon of the presentation, and you'll soon get a link to the recording as well. Again, thanks Chandra, and thanks. Steve
as
well
you, Steve.
for your chat help.
Okay, bye.
Take care everybody. Have a great day.